This is the Porsche design by IWC World Time Alarm reference 3821. This is a watch that tells a story about a different era. The full story of this watch will be for another video, but this watch and others like it represent something else that I wanted to talk about today. Hey there, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining me. Today I want to talk about some of the more interesting watches of previous eras, what they say about their own era, and what they say about watch collecting and watch enthusiasm today. This video was brought about by two different things that happened this week. The first of which was the release of a new moon swatch collection called the Mission to Earth. The second was a video put out by GX Ace about a camera that came out back in 2012. I'm going to leave a link to that video down below. I highly encourage you to watch it. Not only for what it says about the camera space and that camera in particular, but I think the message there applies broadly to a lot of different enthusiast spaces, including watches. And that largely falls along the lines of us being conditioned to seek out the latest and greatest in the same way that we do our phones or our laptops. This planned obsolescence is having an impact on other spaces. The Moon Swatch is, of course, a great example of this. This is a collaboration between Omega and Swatch. It's brought the Speedmaster into a different space, and as a result made it more accessible to a much broader audience, which is a great thing. However, how they release it goes counter to that. They're only available in their boutiques, which has encouraged a flipping culture to develop around these watches, which kind of goes counter to everything that I loved about these watches in the first place. They're still fun and I still enjoy them, but these are watches that generally fall along the lines of encouraging you to consume the latest and greatest versions of them as they release. Now, these are fun, inexpensive watches and they're easy to collect, but this kind of runs counter to how I like to think about watches. I generally view watches as a companion or accessory that will last for generations, and indeed they're often marketed that way. But at the same time, the industry has really fallen into much tighter release schedules, often encouraging this level of FOMO within the enthusiast space and among collectors at large, which generally has us primed to always be on the lookout for what's new. This has facilitated the flipping culture that has become somewhat pervasive in this hobby over the last 5 years. And thankfully that's showing signs of slowing down, but it's worth us being conscious of. And further, I think this has raised an awareness of other watches and watch brands that would otherwise kind of remain hidden behind some of the more hype-driven watches. Not only are there a lot of newer great examples of this, you don't have to look that far back to find some really interesting watches with great stories to tell that have kind of been passed by or forgotten today. This IWC for Porsche design, reference 3821, is a great example. And to be frank, there's a lot of watches from the mid to late 90s and early 2000s that fall into this range. They're still exceptional watches today, and we often find a greater level of creativity being expressed, a greater level of focus brought to the designs that we just don't see today, and all it takes is a little digging to find them. Watches, just like a great camera, should stand the test of time. And sure, they might have some quirks that begin to develop over their age, which is a totally normal thing. They still bring something interesting and unique to the table that is worth appreciating and seeing. IWC has plenty of examples. So does Zenith, so does Omega, so does Grand Seiko, so does Zin. The list goes on. Now, if you followed me for any length of time, you likely know that I am quite fond of this era of sport watches. I find them very interesting, and I find that they take a lot more chances that you generally find in watch brands today. There are so many untold stories of great watches that were produced around this era, and I'd like to bring more of them to light. With that, this channel will be taking a slight shift into focusing more on watches of that era and finding watches that may be relatively unknown, but have something interesting worth exploring about them. Watches like this IWC by Porsche design. We've gone down this road in the past with the Zenith Rainbow Flyback watch. I'll leave a link to that down below. That watch is also from 1997, and it's also a great example of a watch that is somewhat forgotten, but offers a truly unique experience and tells a great story. I want to bring more watches like this to your attention and tell their stories. I'll still be reviewing new watches that I find interesting, but the foundation of this channel is going to shift and focus on watches that you may be less familiar with, but are deserving of some attention by a new generation of enthusiasts coming into this space. Additionally, these watches are generally more available and more accessible, which is a great thing. And getting an understanding and appreciation of them I hope encourages you to rethink your relationship with your watch or watches and be more conscious of how you're pulled into this constant release cycle, not only in the watch industry, but in other spaces that you might be enthusiastic about as well. And on that note, I'd really love to hear from you on this. What are some interesting watches that are largely ignored or unknown today that we could dive into and explore together? Drop your suggestions down below, and I'll do my best to get my hands on them and bring some exposure to them. Keep an eye out for the full story on this IWC and a few other watches like it in the near future. I've got more of my thoughts on this subject now live over on thedeeptrack.com. I'll leave a link down below. Go check it out. Thanks so much for tuning in. Until next time, take care.